Welcome to the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. We're going to explore ways to sharpen our diagnostic skills, find learning resources, and hear from experts in the automotive field. This episode is brought to you by AutoRescueTools.com and Isaac Rodell. If you're looking for scan tools, key cutting equipment, programming laptops, Isaac is the guy. Not only does he have an extensive list of all of those things I mentioned, his support after the purchase is top notch. I bought my Dolphin key cutting tool from Isaac several years back, and he has helped me out every step of the way. Anything that I needed on this thing, I didn't quite understand. If I had an issue with it, I needed something additional. He was easy to get a hold of and helped me out with that. So I highly recommend that you check out his website if you need anything related to keys, scan tools, diagnostic equipment. And again, that's AutoRescueTools.com. The link will be in the show notes. This episode is brought to you by AutoRescueTools.com and Isaac Rodell. If you are looking to get into module programming, but you are not sure what kind of laptop you're going to need or how to set it up for programming, Isaac is your guy. He can set up laptops specifically to do control module programming for specific brands with partitioned hard drives and all the software that you're going to need to do this. He also sells key cutting equipment, scan tools, and other diagnostic equipment. I bought some stuff from him in the past, and the support is phenomenal. So I highly recommend checking out the website. Again, that's AutoRescueTools.com. The link will be in the show notes. I am happy to have Automotive Seminars as a sponsor for the show. Now, if you're not familiar, Automotive Seminars is a diagnostic technician training company. They've got a website that there'll be a link to in the show notes. And what they offer is top-notch training to technicians like us in the field. I've been taking their training courses for years and have got a ton of benefit out of it. They've got top-notch instructors, John Thornton, Scott Shotton, Scott Manna, and every other month they've got a 2-night course that you can sign up for. Join in, ask questions, and afterwards, you've paid for the course, you can access a recorded version whenever you want. You can rewatch the class 2 years later in case you wanted some details on it. And that is a fantastic feature. So make sure to check out the website to see what courses they have available and what's coming up in the future. Hey, what's going on, automotive world? Welcome to another episode of the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. My name is Sean Tipping. I'll be your host once again for today's episode. Today on the show, I'm going to be going through some Nissan CVT transmission programming. This is your guide. If you do any of these Nissan CVTs, which they are extremely common, I know a lot of you out there have dealt with these just because of the high failure rate, but there are a lot of nuances when it comes to programming these. And if you're new to it or you've only done a little bit of it, it can be a little bit confusing when you jump right in, but I'm going to break it down into different steps and tell you about the different vehicles and the processes, what you need to do to the vehicle, and some things to be cautious about going into it, right? So again, just a helpful guide. There's a lot of other resources out there, and I'll mention a few of them as we go through, but this is just a nice overview of what you might need to know if you're doing any CVT programming. So let's get into this. Actually, before we get into it, I just want to remind everybody, number one, we got a YouTube channel. If you want to check that out, there are some visual aids along with the audio that I provide for the podcast. The goal of the podcast is always to make this information consumable with audio only. You don't need the pictures, but they're there if you want to check them out. Of course, it's available on all the podcast players. That's probably how you found this, so I don't need to tell you that. But anyways, what we're doing is if you want to win a free t-shirt, automotive diagnostic podcast t-shirt. I mean, you can buy one too if you want to hit us up. We'll mail one out to you. We have sweatshirts too with the logo on it. And we will be bringing some to the events that we'll be going to, both Vision in Kansas City and the Australian Automotive Expo in April. We'll have some merch if you want to get it at that point. But if you want to win a free one, all you have to do is leave a comment on our YouTube channel or leave a review on the podcasts through Apple Podcasts. And at the end of each month, we're going to do a random drawing from someone who either left a comment or a review. We'll announce it on the podcast. If you hear your name, reach out to us. We'll mail a t-shirt out to you. So that's simple. Just want to get that out of the way. But with that said, let's get into the content of the episode. What we are talking about today is the CVT, constant velocity transmission, that is found in many, many Nissan models starting all the way back in 2008. I don't know exactly what the first year was, but it's about the time that we start seeing major failures in these things. And there's a number of different applications of this transmission, or versions of this transmission with different designations. The CVT 7 and 8 are the big ones that we see all the time. And even within that, like if we just take a CVT 8, there's different versions of that and different designations. So you can get down to the actual model number of the transmission, and I'm not breaking it down that specifically, but anyways, they're used in a lot of different Nissan vehicles, but also Mitsubishi, Mopar, and even some other vehicles as well. And you see failures in those as well, right? The little Jeep Compasses, they use these CVTs, they fail in those. The Mitsubishi Outlander and Lancer. What you're going to find, though, is those are the exact same transmissions. And when it comes to the Mitsubishi program, when we're doing that, it's almost identical to the process that we use with Nissan. So if you've done some Nissans, you go to Nissan, you're like, well, this is, or if you've done some Nissan, you go to Mitsubishi, you're like, well, this is an oddly familiar process. And it's because it's the same transmission. And these are made by a company called Jatco. It's a Japanese company, and they supply all of these CVTs for all of these manufacturers, but Nissan seems to be the most common one. I don't know if they just use that transmission more than any of these other models, or if the brand itself is just more popular, but by far, the Nissans are the ones that we see the most when we're getting called out for programming. Don't do a ton of diag on these things. You know, occasionally there'll be a circuit code or something like that that will help a shop out with, but generally speaking, it's pretty easy to identify that the transmission has failed. And plus, with the high failure rate, I mean, we don't want to jump to conclusions too much, but there's not a whole lot of guesswork when it comes to failures of these things. If it seems like the transmission is going out, there's a good chance it could be. You know, you want to do your due diligence and your checks, but the codes, which we'll talk about, even kind of help point to like, hey, this thing is dead. You got to replace it. There's a judder code that if that's in there, that's a pretty good indication that you're going to be either tearing down or replacing the CVT. So that's the ones that we're talking about. And as far as the failure goes with these things, it really, a lot of it comes down to overheating of the transmission. The CVTs operate with a like steel belt that kind of works like a snowmobile clutch. If you've never watched a video of how the internals of the CVT work, it's pretty interesting, where they're changing the diameter of the driven and the drive gear, and it changes the gear ratio between the input and the output of the transmission. It's a great idea in theory. It just wasn't executed real well in these transmissions. I know there's other CVTs out there. They all kind of seem to have problems. The idea is great. It's actually pretty simplistic and achieves quite a bit, you know, the changing gear ratio that we need to apply the engine's power to the road in all different situations. It does it very simply. And a lot of the time you would think, hey, the simplest application is going to be the best. And maybe not so true here, but that doesn't mean that it can't be improved or isn't improved in other applications, right? But for the ones that we're talking about here, they have lots of overheating problems, and that leads to the failure of these CVTs. And, you know, I'm not transmission builder. I know a couple guys out there that'll actually rebuild these transmissions. Most places are just replacing them. But what they do have is some software updates for these transmissions. We'll talk about that. And although I don't know exactly what Nissan has changed about the software, somebody out there might, they don't come out exactly and say, we've changed this application within the software and the operation of the transmission control module, but they have done some things that are involved with the recalls and the updates to the software in the transmission controller to improve and extend the life of these transmissions. And so much so that if you don't do the update, they're not going to warranty the new transmission that they sell you. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit more about the software update, but they've done some things to try and help and improve the overheating issues that they've had with these CVTs. So before we get into this, a lot of the information I'm going to share here, I've learned out in the field just by doing this a lot and hitting some stumbling blocks, but I've also received some help from some really smart guys out there in the field also doing this. And I want to, as much as possible, when I'm doing this podcast, give credit where credit's due. So I'm going to list off in no particular order, and I do apologize if there's somebody out there that I'm forgetting. I just made a quick list of guys that came to mind that have given me really useful information surrounding these particular vehicles. Right. This isn't an all-inclusive list, but Corey Brueggemann, Cody Gaddy, Ben Jameson, Keith Perkins, Don Smazel, and Sean Kreiner. I'm sure there's others too I'm probably forgetting, but again, those are the ones that really came to mind with these particular vehicles, that they do a lot of these too. And some of the information here definitely has come from information that they've shared with me. So I want to make sure that I get that out there. So anyways, it's really good to have a network of people to help you out when you're in a bind or trying to learn something for the first time. So after you replace a CVT or a shop replace a CVT, right? I'm going to be coming at this from the perspective of a mobile diagnostic and programming technician. So I've come in after the fact that the transmission's been replaced, but if you're listening to this and you're a tech in a shop, you'll be doing the replacement. So just keep that in mind, is that my perspective a lot of the time is after the fact, and I'm not doing the actual repair myself. But either way, we're getting called in after that CVT is replaced, or you're there after you've replaced it. There are several steps that are required to complete this job if you want to do it properly. And not only for the vehicle to operate properly, but this is also required for warranty purposes. So if you are buying a new CVT from Nissan or really any other rebuilder, but I know Nissan is very particular about this. If they sell you a new unit, they're going to want these things in the situation where there is a failure of the new unit. You need to make sure that you document as much as possible when you're doing the things that we're going to be talking about in this episode. So a suggestion here, you're going to be doing this with programming software or with a scan tool. Make sure to do some screenshots, and you can do this by on your keyboard. You could just hit the little Windows button and then print screen, and that will save a screenshot to your pictures folder. Or you can use the application that's built into any Windows computer called Snippet. If you're using an Apple device, I haven't done that. So I'm trying to think of what to do there. I'm sure there's an easy way to take a screenshot, but any scan tool is going to have an easy way just to snap a screenshot as well. And you want to document all this stuff. That's the big thing, is to have this and attach it to the invoice or put it somewhere that you're going to have reference to it in case there's a warranty issue down the road. And the more pictures, the better, right? We like to take pictures of the CD itself, of the QR code itself, of every step along the way. And we're using Nissan Console, the factory software for Nissan. I have heard of Nissan not accepting warranty claims if the programming was not performed with Nissan Console. Now, I don't know, when it comes to Nissan headquarters, like what their official stance is on it. And I think some of it comes down to the individual distributor or parts guy or whoever you're dealing with. And they might be the one to say, nope, we're not going to accept that. But I don't want to give in that situation, someone any reason to deny a potential warranty claim for the shop that I'm working with, right? I don't want my part of the job, because I'm only doing part of it, to be questionable at all. So I'm going to use the factory software. When it's a new transmission, I should note that when if it's used, I'll talk about that. We'll use some aftermarket tools because there's no warranty there. But when we have a warranty with a new transmission, I want to have documentation as much as possible. I attach those screenshots to the invoice. They get sent to the customer. They get saved with me. We have reference for that stuff if we've got to go back and deal with it later. Okay. And I have dealt with shops that didn't do the update or the process that they needed to after one of these CVTs. It burnt up the new one, and Nissan told them to pound sand. You got to buy another $4,000 unit. That's all there is to it. So make sure you're doing this stuff, or alert your customer to the fact, like, hey, you got to do this if you want warranty coverage on these things. And I have seen that happen where new units fail. Now, how much does the software update play a role in that? I mean, I think it does, right? I can't say that the new software is going to completely change and protect that new transmission and it's never going to fail. It might still, but if you don't do anything, it's much more likely that that new unit is also going to fail. So anyways, cover your butt, get the pictures, get the screenshots, and then that way you're covered and you don't have to worry about anything. I will note here that I also am going to do this on used transmissions as well, even though there's not a warranty. And the reason being is what I mentioned there with the software update, that it actually does improve the function of the transmission. And again, it's my understanding that they're improving the cooling or reducing the overheating of the transmission itself with some of the software updates that they've put into the calibration that's loaded into the TCM. So if a shop puts a used transmission in, which I'll talk a little bit about that as well, I am going to look to see if there's a software update for that. And I'm going to perform it, right? And it's more of a courtesy to the customer as opposed to a warranty issue there, but I'm still going to check for it in the case of a used CVT. Okay, now when we're looking at a particular Nissan vehicle and maybe we're not super familiar with what needs to be done on what vehicle, obviously accessing service information is going to be your best friend here. I'm hoping I can provide you some good information on this episode as well that you can reference, but service information is going to be the best place so you can enter the exact vehicle you have and then you can look up the process. But I'll give you a little bit of a shortcut, and this one originally came from Corey Brueggemann, gave this tip to me, was when you're in service information, you're going to search, and there's a search tab in just about every service information system that I'm aware of. Mitchell, ALLDATA, Identifix, they all have it. You're going to type in additional services in the search bar, and that's it. And it's going to come up with a TSB for the Nissan that you're working with that's going to outline the processes that are necessary when replacing a transmission. I'm not talking about the R&R. I'm talking about what else needs to be done after you've put in the new transmission into the vehicle. Right. And this will be different depending on the vehicle that you're working on. And we'll talk about some of the differences. And that's kind of why I'm doing this, because it's not a one size fits all Nissan CVT. There are differences in the programming process, and there are differences in what you need and what you need to do depending on the vehicle. And this is where these TSBs with the additional service info, they're really going to guide you onto what type of vehicle. And there's really two main ones. I like to break it down with ones that require a CD with the characterization info and ones that don't. All right. And so there are CVTs, and usually when we have a customer call, the easiest way for us to figure out what we're dealing with without even searching this is say, hey, did it come with a white CD with a QR code on it? And the shop will tell us, no, it didn't come with one, or yes, it did. And we'll be like, hey, make sure you hang on to that CD. We're going to need it for programming. We'll talk about what's on that CD in a little bit here. But obviously, if you're the one ordering the transmission, you're going to know that. But pay attention, because we have had scenarios where the person installing the transmission just tossed all the paperwork, including the CD, because it comes in a plastic bag with a bunch of information that the installer needs to be aware of. And the CD with the characterization info is also in there. And they just toss that in the garbage because that's just how some guys operate. All right, that's cool. But then they say, no, it didn't come with a CD. But when we get in and hooked up to the scan tool, it's very obvious to see that, yes, this one did come with a CD. It has the steps in the scan tool where we need to add that characterization info. So anyways, does it have a CD, a new CD with the new transmission or not? And that's going to change things. And these two different TSBs, which I'm going to put in the show notes and I've also outlined here in the YouTube video, will really guide you. So you can even just do a Google search with these TSB numbers, save these two files to your phone or your desktop or whatever, and you'll have the breakdown of the vehicle models and years that these apply to. Now, I wouldn't say it's all encompassing. There's probably examples of vehicles that are not included within these two TSBs, and then just use service info. And there's nothing wrong with using service info, but I like to have some shortcuts and some easily referenceable documents that I can access quickly when it's something that I'm doing on a repetitive basis. So I provided these TSBs for you, so you have that info. You can find them in service info or Google as well, though. All right. So there are 3 steps, I should say, and within each step, there's going to be multiple steps. But when I think about this in my head, when I'm going to program a Nissan CVT, there are 3 different things that I need to think about that I make sure that I accomplish before I say, yep, that vehicle is good to go down the road. I've done my part. I'm charging my money for this. Okay. Now, again, this is after the CVT has been replaced, the new one or a used one is installed. So I'll break these down into general steps, and then we'll go into some more detail on each one so you understand what needs to be done on what type of vehicle. So step 1, before we really do anything, we are going to check for and perform, if necessary, a software update. And this is one of the most important things that you do and easy to overlook too. You could potentially not do the software update. You could do the characterization right, get rid of the judder code, do the relearns, clear the fluid life, send the thing down the road, and the car's not going to really throw out any red flags immediately that you didn't do something here. But this is where, if you're not doing the software update to the vehicle, to the TCM, you're not going to have warranty coverage on that vehicle if there's a failure, which there most likely will be down the road. And then that again is where the shop that installed the transmission is going to have to eat the new one. And if you were let's say you're the programmer who came in and you didn't do your part and you told them it was all good to go, well then, hey, now you're involved with that and you might have to eat a $4,000 transmission. So you want to avoid that situation, obviously. But that's step 1, is we want to check to see if there is a software update. In a lot of cases there is. If it's already been done, great, we can skip this step. But if it does need to be done, perform said software update. We'll talk a little bit about that. And again, I'll do this even on used transmissions here. Less critical about the warranty, more important as far as the function of the transmission goes. And I just want to provide that to my customer. I mean, a used CVT is a gamble. It's a risk. You don't really know the condition of that thing when you're putting it in there. And I tell my customers that, but I'll do the update anyways. I'll do my part to give it the best chance that it has to make it down the road, even though, some of these things were made with paper mache and popsicle sticks, in my opinion. We'll give it the best shot it has to continue down the road, even with a used one. All right. So that's step 1. Step 2 is we are going to perform a characterization right. And what this is doing is this is taking unique information about the new or the used transmission, and we are writing it to the transmission control module for that vehicle. Now, every single one of these CVTs that I'm aware of, the transmission control module, the TCM, is external to the transmission. And that's not true of some other Nissan and Infiniti transmissions, because the ones where they're not CVTs, they're a traditional automatic transmission. The TCM is part of the valve body, and there's some programming there that's going to be similar, but I'm not really talking about those vehicles here. Because in that case, If a transmission is replaced, so is the TCM. So of course you have to program it. But in this case, when you replace these CVT transmissions, the TCM remains with the vehicle. It's the original TCM. It's got the original software, but it also has the original characterization data for the unique CVT that is installed in that vehicle, right? The flow rates for the valve body and the different components that are operating within that transmission. There is some information there that is actually written to the module so that it knows all the unique details about that particular transmission. And when we replace it, we need to update that info and say, hey, there's a new transmission in here. You need to know new specific data for this particular transmission. And that's going to take some different forms depending on the car that we're dealing with, the transmission that we're dealing with. We'll talk about that. And finally, step 3, this is clear the fluid degradation or the fluid life, which is in the TCM. And then there are some other relearn processes like a forward clutch learn. Depends on the model that you're dealing with. We'll talk about that. So those are our main steps. Hey, have you ever been faced with the challenge of sourcing, installing, and programming a used control module in a vehicle? I know a lot of us have. It seems to be happening more and more often today with the volume of control modules on vehicles, the cost of some new ones, or even the availability of new control modules. In some cases, used may be the only option. So what do you do here? I strongly recommend checking out SJ Auto Solutions and Tommy Oliva. Tommy offers a cloning service for used control modules to make these things plug and play for the vehicle that you're working on. In a lot of cases, he is also able to source the control modules if you're unable to locate one for the vehicle that you're working on. But once you get connected with Tommy, he's going to offer fantastic support from start to finish to make sure that that control module is going to work in your application. He's also got tech support that he offers through his website, along with some free resources there as well on information about used control module programming. So make sure to check out SJ Auto Solutions. I can't recommend that enough. We'll talk about that. So those are our main steps. First one, we're going to talk about the software here. This is pretty easy to check to see if there is a software update. You don't even necessarily have to be at the vehicle, right? If you are working with a shop and they have a scan tool and they know how to use it, which I realize it's not always the case, they can get you the calibration info out of the TCM. I think you can even get this through Mode 9 Global. I could be wrong on that. But if you go into the TCM and you go to the ECU info, you're going to have 2 5-digit numbers separated by a dash. If it's a CVT, those first 5 numbers are almost always going to be 31036. And then the second 5 digits are going to be more varied, and it's going to depend on the car and the CVT that you're dealing with. The one that I'm going to reference in some of the pictures here, the second set of 5 digits is 7FL1A. All right, so you're going to want to record this number. So you take this number and you're going to go online, and you don't even need to sign up. You don't need a login for this. Just go to nissanTechInfo.com, and you're going to go into its console. It says blank and reprogramming. You're going to click on that. When you go to the web page, if you look, and you click on your country, it'll show you 6 boxes of texts. It is the lower left one as of 2024, February 2024. That's how they have it set up. Who knows? They could always change things. But click on that reprogramming section, and you'll see on the right side of the page, there is a blank field where it says, please enter the first 5 digits of your ECU part number. And that's where you're going to put that 31036. And after you put that in, it's going to open up a second window. Now, you could put in any number here. If you're trying to update an engine control module, you do the same thing here, but we're doing the CVT. I will say I dealt with one recently, and I've talked to a few other people that have as well. They got a TCM part number that was 31039, and that created some difficulty in order to get the correct file. If you run into that, there is a way to correct it by editing the CSV lookup file, but it requires a little bit of knowledge on how to edit some files within a computer. But if you ever get that, feel free to reach out to me and I'll give you a hand through that. But it is a little bit of a tricky process. And I think where the issue is there was on Nissan's manufacturing. I think the wrong number was put into some of these TCMs from the factory. It's kind of my opinion. I don't know that for sure, but anyways, I don't want to muddy the waters here too much. Just to say, hey, if it's not a 31036 on a CVT, and it's not something like brand new 2024, I don't know what those numbers are, but most of these are all the same for the first 5 digits. 31036. But anyways, that second 5 digits, it's going to open up a second field for you to type in numbers. It'll say, please enter the last 5 digits of your ECU part number, and you're going to type those in. And then if there is an update, it will show you the update below. It'll pop up with a little clickable link with a new file number that you can click on, and you can purchase it through the Nissan website. And that's when you'll have to actually have an account, sign in. You purchase the file, they're like $35 or something like that. But you get the number, and this is where it tells you, yes, there is an update. Now, if nothing comes up here, double check to make sure that you typed in everything correctly. You're using capital letters and that everything is correct on the screen. I've had some browser issues with this before. I usually use Chrome and don't have an issue. But anyways, if there's nothing there, it means that the update has already been done or they don't have an update for that particular model. But if it does, it's going to show you. Now, there are some cases where there are multiple file options, and you're going to have to do a little bit of digging to figure out which one. Some of the Ultimas, this is the case, and you can use some info through RepairLink to help you find which one is going to be the one that you need. In some cases, I've just had to buy 2 files, and you can put them both into the reprogramming folder, and it's going to allow you to pick them within console when you're programming. In some cases, it'll still allow you to pick between multiple files, and it's going to give you an error if one of them's wrong. In some cases, it won't proceed with the programming until you put the correct file in the reprogramming folder. But anyways, once we've typed in this number, if there's a file, you either need to purchase it or see, do I already own that file? Now, one thing about these Nissan files is you can reuse them, right? So if you have purchased an update file for Nissan Altima and you get the same type of Nissan Altima later, you can reuse this file. This file is not unique to a specific transmission. It's just unique to a model of vehicle. And so you can reuse these update files as long as they are the most current for said vehicle and it matches what you're working on. You can reuse these files so you don't have to buy it again. So hang on to these. Don't get rid of them after you download it from the Nissan site. Save that somewhere. And honestly, you can make a copy of it and save it elsewhere, but you can also just save it in the reprogramming folder for console. It won't hurt anything to have multiple files in there. But keep that in mind. You don't have to buy a new one every single time. So after you put this in the programming folder, and it's the repro programming folder that you would have to create if you're using Nissan Consult. I've never actually used NERS, but I think you have to create something similar when you're using the J2534 version of this. Like I said, I like to use the factory software just so that I don't have any issues. I know that it's going to work, reduces headaches. And even then, it's sometimes difficult to work with, but I've heard the J software is a challenge. So anyways, once you have that updated file in the reprogramming folder, console will automatically recognize it. And when you start with the process of reprogramming, it's going to show you, hey, here's the current part number. Here's the part number we're going to be updated to. All right. And then it's going to go through the process. There's a number of steps to the reprogramming, but keep your voltage at a specific level for the vehicle and follow the prompts in the tool. And it's pretty straightforward with these TCMs. I haven't had a whole lot of issue with them. Not to say that there couldn't be some issue, but for the most part, they are pretty straightforward. I think in recent memory, the biggest issue I had was the file where in the transmission, in the TCM itself, it was a 31039 instead of the 31036, and we had to do some trickery to get console to update the software. But other than that, they're pretty straightforward. Just make sure your voltage stays up at an adequate level. Use a maintainer when you're doing these things. So that's the programming side. And there's more details to the actual programming. If you want to know more, you can check out like Keith Perkins' website. He's got step by step on the actual reprogramming, but a lot of it is following prompts, and it's pretty repetitive as far as that goes. There's not a whole lot of difference from vehicle to vehicle. After you're done with that programming, there is a characterization right that is necessary. Now, this is going to take different forms depending on the situation, right? And again, I break this down by, did the transmission come with a CD or was there no CD? And that's excluding the case where somebody throws the CD in the trash. Did it actually come with a CD or not? And that will change what we're going to do. Now, this might also change things in the situation where it actually didn't come with a CD, if there is an update or not, if there's a software update. And I'll explain why that is. That will change the steps and how this is done just a little bit, depending on if there's a software update for it or not. And it will also change things if this is used versus a new transmission, right? And it's very difficult when we ask shops, hey, is this a new or used transmission? And they say it's a new one, and we get there and it's used. And we're like, well, yeah, it's new to the vehicle. No. Like, is it new? And sometimes saying new helps. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes we ask, where did you buy it from? And that's the more helpful to get the information that we're looking for. But sometimes it's a struggle to figure out what we're actually dealing with until we get there. But it will change our process slightly and what tools we're going to actually use for this part of the process. But we want to get that unique information, the flow rate data for this specific transmission into the TCM so that it knows what it's dealing with, and hopefully the thing shifts right. Again, if it's a used one, that's a risk, it's a gamble, but we're going to do the best on our side to get it set up properly. Okay. So let's start with a new transmission that comes with a CD. If you've ever seen one of these CDs, they are white. They got two numbers at the top, a QR code, and it says Jatco CVT8 CD for service. Okay. And that will come with the transmission. You're going to need some type of CD drive in order to get the file off this CD. There's only one file in there. It's a CSV file, and you can open it up on your computer in Notepad or Excel spreadsheet, and it'll come up with some text. But there is a QR code on the CD that also has the same information as what is loaded onto the CD. But if you're doing this with Nissan Consult or a NERS software, something like that, you're going to want to load the CD and the file that's on it onto a computer and pull the file off of there. And then when you go through the actual characterization right, which is a special function within the scan tool, it's going to ask, well, what file do you want to use? And then you don't even have to take the calibration off of the CD. You can just tell it, hey, it's right there in the CD. Now I do save the files just in case I ever need them for some reason, but you don't have to. But that's what's on that CD is the unique characterization for that particular transmission. You're going to go in through consult and you're going to run the characterization right, and it will take that information and write it to the TCM. Okay. And it's giving that external TCM what it needs to know about the CVT and the valve body. So pretty straightforward if you have a new CD, but you do need to, if you're not the one installing the transmission, you do need to let the shop know, hey, we need that CD. Don't damage it. Don't throw it away. We're going to need that to load the info into the TCM. Now, something to keep in mind here, this particular step is what gets rid of the judder code that you're going to find in a lot of these transmissions that are failed. And that's kind of the code of death in these transmissions. If you have that and you haven't replaced the transmission or anything like that, it means that that transmission is most likely failed. If you look at the Nissan process for that code, it's pretty much, is this code present? Well, either take it apart and rebuild it or replace it. And there's a couple different variations of the code. It's a P17F0 or P17F1. It changes, like, do we take this apart or do we just replace it? That's really it. But what you'll find is if you put in a new transmission, used transmission, whatever, you can't clear this code. You can sit there all day with console, with whatever tool, erase, 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 disconnect the battery, blah, blah, blah. I've had shops do all this stuff. And a lot of the times a shop will put in a used tranny, and that's the only reason they're calling us. They're like, hey, it's got this code in here. We can't get rid of it. What's the deal? Well, you have to perform a characterization right in order for this code to clear. Whatever form that takes for that transmission, you've got to write that information, right? So when you have that CD that comes with a new transmission, you do the characterization right, it's getting that information in the TCM, but it is also going to clear out that judder code. And that's the only way that you can do that. Otherwise, that code's just going to stay in there even with a new transmission. And, clearly you don't want that with a new transmission, but it's also kind of a good thing. We've had shops where they didn't replace the transmission at all. This is usually like a used car lot, and they just want us to clear that code out. And I'm like, well, did you replace the transmission? No. Okay, well, we're not, could I? Theoretically, could I get that code to go away? Yeah, I could take like another calibration, or I could get the information off the QR code on the sticker on the range sensor, and I could use an aftermarket tool to write that, and that would clear the judder code, but I don't want to do that, right? That's a disservice to whoever buys that car, which we know has a transmission that has failed, and that code's probably going to pop back up, but we don't want to put anybody in that situation. So unless the transmission's been replaced, I'm not going to clear that code out by doing the characterization rights, but that's what would be required. So just keep in mind, if you see that judder code, that's what that means. Now, what about a situation where I have a transmission that did originally come with a CD, and now maybe they've installed a used one? Well, I don't have that CD. Of course, like, nobody keeps the CD with the transmission. I don't think that's ever been a thing. You can also find this information in a couple different locations. Number one, there's a QR code that's on the range sensor of these transmissions. This QR code is the same QR code that's on the CD that comes with the new transmission. It's the same information. There's also a serial number stamped on that QR code, which we'll talk about a little bit, but there's a QR code there on that range sensor. And there's some aftermarket tools, Autel and Launch are the ones that come to mind, that can take a picture of this QR code, get the information out of it, and write that information to the TCM. So we're doing essentially the same thing as we were with the CD, but now this is a used transmission. It's got its own unique characteristics, but we don't have the CD. Well, we still have the information on that range sticker. We use an aftermarket scan tool. We pump that into the TCM, and now the TCM at least knows the unique characteristics of this used CVT. The condition of the transmission, we don't know, but we've, again, set it up best as possible to be successful driving down the road. Again, Autel and Launch, they have to be ones that have a camera in order to do this, because you're actually going to take a picture of that QR code. Sometimes that QR code can be difficult to see with like air ducts and stuff, and getting the tool actually down in there to get a clear shot of that can be difficult. Sometimes I'll take a picture with my phone, because you can get your phone down in there. You can use Zoom on your phone, and then I'll take a picture of the picture, right? So I'll have the picture of the QR code on my phone, and then I'll take a picture of that with the tool. So sometimes that's how you get that info. Something to note about that QR code: if you take a picture with your iPhone of this QR code, it will show you the string of text that is read from that QR code. And actually, if you do it with Autel, it'll pop up with the same text in a little text window. Now, I one time tried to type this in manually. Now, not only is that tedious, but I was unsuccessful. And I've tried this in a couple different applications. I'm actually working on a solution for some Mitsubishi stuff right now in order to do this. Just typing in the text data does not work, right? If you just take it from your iPhone, and it'll translate it into, it's like, I don't know, 100 digits. If you just type it into the Autel, which it gives you the option to do, it it won't write it. It'll say function not supported. And this is actually the same thing on Mitsubishi's too. That doesn't work. There is something happening in the background where Autel launch, um, maybe in console 2, it's actually transferring that information from the QR code into something usable, some different format for the TCM to accept. And typing in the actual numbers doesn't work. So you have to get a picture of that QR code is really what I'm getting at there. And I am working on something to convert that, but I haven't quite figured it out yet. If you know how, let me know. Might be interested to know, but I'm working on exactly what changes there, because obviously Launch and Autel have figured that out, but it's not a direct transfer of text into the transmission itself, although it will pop up with it on your iPhone. Anyways, what do we do if that QR code's gone? One thing to be very careful of, if you're the one doing the programming, you look down on that QR code, it's covered in dirt and grease. You're like, oh, I'll just wipe that grease right off with my thumb. Don't do that. um, Ask me how I know. The ink on that sticker will wipe right off with grease. It's gone. Brake clean, gone. You can't read that code, and there's nothing you can do with it once the ink's wiped off. It's all over. It's kind of like the solenoid strategies on Fords. Same thing. You get a little bit of brake cleaner or grease on there, you wipe it, there goes the ink. You're done. In that case, there is also a serial number that is stamped onto the case of the transmission. And you'll see the same serial number. It's a 7-digit one. You'll see it on the CD. You'll see it on the QR sticker as well. And so you may not even need to find the case if you can still read it on the QR sticker. But that 7-digit code can be used on the Nissan website under the service support items to purchase a file from Nissan. So you're going to type in your name, the VIN, and I would do the VIN of the vehicle it's going into, because if it's used, you probably don't know the VIN that it came out of, but you could try that. But you type in that 7-digit serial number into the service support items on nissantecinfo.com, and hopefully Nissan will have a file that you can purchase. Okay. Now, there are times where it will kick back and say there is no file found for this. Otherwise, sometimes there is. You can buy it for $25. You download it and it will run through console just like it would otherwise. It's just you don't have a CD. Now you have a file that you downloaded, and it's got the information for that transmission. Now, if you're in a situation where you typed in this number and nothing pops up, which does happen, you have some options here, and you're going to want to talk to your customer here and give them the scenario. And this is usually in the case of a used transmission, right? If this is a new transmission, you got to find that CD, or you got to find another way to get the right info in. But with a used transmission, I'll talk to the customer and say, hey, we can't get this file. The QR sticker has been damaged. We've tried the serial number conversion. It didn't work. You could potentially write a file from another vehicle of the same model if you've saved some of them. Now, is this right? No, not really. Is it going to get rid of the jutter code? Yeah. How's that vehicle going to be going down the road? I don't know. It'd be like putting the wrong solenoid strategy into a Ford. It might be okay. It might be a little weird, but at the end of the day, I'm going to talk to the customer, let them decide, and say, hey, man, it's a used CVT. We're rolling the dice anyways. What would you like us to do here? And so it's a little bit of a gray area there. Not the best way to get a job done, but putting a used CVT in a car is kind of a band-aid anyways. And again, we're going to do a software update, and we can take care of that if there is one. And it's not a great position to be in, but we'll leave put the ball in the customer's court and say, hey, we can do this if you want. And then, if not, there's going to be a jutter code on there, and there's not a whole lot else you can do at that point. There's not a whole lot of other options. They could get another used transmission that had the QR sticker on there, or a serial number that's usable that we could get the file for, but there's really not a whole lot else you can do in that situation. And you do run into that where Nissan just doesn't have the file. I don't know exactly why, but that is the case sometimes. Okay. So that covers vehicles that came with a CD, or transmissions that came with a CD originally, and how to handle used situations. For vehicles that don't come with a CD at all. Doesn't have them. This would be Versa and Sentra, the main ones that I deal with, but check the TSB that I referenced earlier. It'll have more info there. The transmission data is actually going to be stored in a ROM chip that's inside of the transmission on the valve body. And I got a picture here so you can see it. It's just a little black box. It has that same CD info, but it's inside the trans. It does go with the transmission, unlike the CD. So if you were to take a used one, slap it in another vehicle, we've got all the info. We just have to do the relearn process with the scan tool to get it out of there. The TCM does not automatically recognize this. There is a process. Now, if you're doing a software update on one of these vehicles, right, you went through that process, you looked up the file, oh, okay, it does have an update, it will force you to do this. This is part of the software update process. Whereas the previous vehicles that we were talking about with the CD, it does not force you to do the characterization update during the software update. On these vehicles versus Sentra, it will make that part of the process. Before you even get to the point of updating the software, it's going to have you relearn the data that's within the valve body. Okay. So it's all built into one, right? So what I'm saying here is if you do an update on one of these, it has an update, it's going to take care of this process all as one. You'll be all done. Still want to document all your steps along the way, but it makes it very simple to get it done. Now, to do this portion of it, the tool walks you through what you need to do. It's going to involve the shifter, the brake pedal, the accelerator, the push button start, or the key. And it's going to have you do some key cycles. You're going to be on the brake, accelerator press down in reverse. Again, some key cycles, and it's going to tell you exactly what to do when. What I can tell you is this needs to be performed in order when the tool says. And if you don't, it won't work and it'll make you start over. And if you're doing a software update, it's like not going to let you proceed until you get this right. Some of the push button start ones can be a little trickier because it needs to see a key cycle. But as far as I've been able to tell, I've always been able to get it done, even though the one with the blade key is definitely easier to create the key cycles that are needed. One thing I can say is don't take it out of reverse until it tells you to take it out of reverse. I've been a little quick on the draw there and caused myself issues. But again, push button start vehicles, a little tricky there. If you're dealing with older, the Nissan Rogue comes to mind. These were like the real early CVTs. This process is not even a scan tool function. This is only found if you look it up in service info. And let's say we have one of these. We got a 08 and 09 Rogue with a judder code. They just put in either a new or a used CVT. It doesn't really matter. And there was no software update to it, or the update had already been done. But we still have this judder code. And I go into the special functions of the tool. I don't see a characterization or a data relearn, I think it's called in some of these. It's not there. And what do you do here? Well, you're still going to do this same process where, and there's specific steps here, but it's brake, accelerator, key on, reverse, and then you actually in those cases you go to the erase codes and you erase the codes that are in the transmission, and then you turn the key off, wait 10 seconds, turn the key on, put it into park, and your code should be gone at that point. This is also in those vehicles going to force the TCM to observe the data within transmission. And in those cases, those early ones that don't have it as a special function, the way you verify this and the way I verify it for my documentation is I use the calibration data that you can find within the TCM through the scan tool. And I will screenshot the before and I will screenshot the after to show that it's actually changed. Now it'll be all zeros immediately after you do this. And then once you start the vehicle, put it into drive, you'll see those numbers change and they'll be different from what they were originally because it has observed the new data in the new transmission or the used transmission. Okay. So these processes are very similar in nature because of what we're doing with the brake, the accelerator, reverse, key cycles. But in these early ones, there's no process in the tool. You're reading service info in order to get this done. And it doesn't exactly jump out at you that this is what you need to do, but that's how you handle those early ones. The later ones, and I don't have a year cut off, but the later ones with like the Sentra and the Versa, you click on the process within the tool and it walks you through it, or you do the software update and it forces you to do it and it walks you through the process there as well. So just something to keep in mind on these. Also on these vehicles, I've run into this once or twice. If that ROM chip that's in the valve body, in the transmission, is either disconnected, there's some circuit issue, it is wrong for the vehicle. Somebody put in the wrong valve body or the wrong used transmission, or it's damaged for whatever reason, and you go to do this process, you're erasing the data of the transmission and you're putting in new stuff. It'll let you erase it, but then if there's nothing for it to read, it's going to be in a really strange state. And how you can identify this is you're going to lose park and neutral on your dash, and the vehicle's not going to start. And it was there before, okay? And there's going to be a code in the BCM that the for park position. And if you go and you look at your range sensor, everything's fine there, but the TCM actually puts out the park position on the data bus and the BCM picks that up. But once it's in this state where you've erased the TCM data and it hasn't relearned anything new, it's got nothing in there, it goes into this weird state. And you think you did something wrong. This happened to me after a shop put in a used transmission. They put in the wrong used transmission. And it just got to that point of erasure in there and it had nothing else to go with. And so it's just in this weird state where it can't output any data and you're not able to start the vehicle. This happened to me once on a Sentra when I was trying to do the software update and it just blocked me. And it's like, it kept saying fail, fail, fail. And then after the fail, I had no park or neutral in this thing. I'm like, what the heck? I know I had park or neutral before. So we had no idea what happened at first. Well, eventually through screwing around a lot, we found out it was the wrong transmission. So that data chip that was in there just didn't belong to that particular vehicle. And so it wasn't able to observe the new data. So just keep that in mind if you run into that situation where you lost park and neutral from the dash, and that happened after you tried to clear data. There's something up with that ROM chip. It is wrong, disconnected, damaged, something like that. But that can happen on these vehicles that don't come with a CD. Okay, so that's the end of step 2 as far as the characterization, right, for these transmissions. The final steps: fluid life reset, forward clutch learn, and a test drive. Not all of those, all the vehicles have all of those. I will always reset the fluid life. I don't personally do the forward clutch learn myself. Reason being is I don't always know whether the transmission where I'm at the vehicle is full of fluid and it's ready to go. Can I start the vehicle? I leave it up to the shop. I just tell them, hey, the last step you need to do is within the scan tool. It's forward clutch learn, and nobody really has a problem with that. I do that on GM transmissions. I do that on most stuff. Like, hey, for the final test drive and stuff, you guys got to go do this once it's all set and ready to go. If they make a special request, oh, hey, it's ready, can you just do that? I'll take care of it. But so much of the time, they haven't done the final checks. A lot of the time, with good reason, they haven't even started the vehicle because they don't know if they can before I'm done with my part. And so I'm going to let them do their thing, get it all full of fluid, and then they can take care of that last step. But I've done all the programming and everything that I've, deemed necessary to complete the job. Couple other quick notes on this and we'll wrap this up. Do keep in mind that speed sensors on these transmissions can be left disconnected or swapped, put into the wrong place, and you will get some weird problems. They will drive like that transmission is complete garbage right out of the gate, and they don't always set codes that are really that helpful right away. But just be aware that in some cases, in some of these vehicles, the connectors will reach and the connectors are the same, and you can get the wrong speed sensors plugged into the wrong spot. That'll give you some weird problems. Disconnected, you'll get some weird problems from these things, and they won't set circuit codes like you think they would. So keep that in mind. If you're the installer, just pay attention, get everything plugged in right. You won't have a problem. If you're getting a call back after you've programmed one of these things, hey man, it's not shifting, there's all kinds of problems. That's the first thing I'm looking for, is to see if it's been plugged in correctly. Um, That, and then the last note is used transmissions are a risk. Warn your customers. Tell them up front, hey man, this is a used CVT out of a car that has an extremely high failure rate for CVTs. We will do our part. We will document everything, but we can in no way guarantee that this thing's going to go down the road fine. It may have been out the door before you even touched it, and that's just the way it is. So do keep that in mind if you're doing used ones or you're servicing customers that are putting used transmissions in. It is definitely something that you want to think about. But that's what I've got for Nissan CVT programming. I hope that wasn't too boring. I realize that's a lot of technical information. You can scroll through and find what you need to, and just keep this as a reference. Maybe if you're driving to a CVT job or you got one coming, listen to this and be all set up for it. But I hope that information is helpful. I want to thank everybody out there for listening. I hope to see you at Vision coming up here in a couple of weeks, 2024. But other than that, let's all get out there, start fixing the world one car at a time.